Hello, this is our presentation of impacts on climate change, permafrost melt in Russia.
By Natalie Best.
Agaana Pathmathevan.
And Lilly Tran.
Effects of permafrost melting in the present. This is a figure demonstrating the permafrost distribution in the Northern Hemisphere. It shows continuous permafrost distribution in a darker blue and discontinuous in a lighter blue. Continuous means that it's a greater cover and discontinuous is less cover. What is permafrost melting? Permafrost is soil that is frozen and remains solid over long spans of times. It's usually found in the poles north and south, but specifically the North Pole. Permafrost has been increasingly melting as a result of global warming, and this is a positive feedback system because global warming melts permafrost, which releases methane, which then furthers greenhouse gas emissions, and the cycle continues. The thawed carcasses can expose the public to potentially harmful bacteria, such as anthrax, and toxic metals, such as mercury, are released into rivers with permafrost thawing. Mercury, for example, is in drinking water in the Russian Arctic, and fish can also be impacted by this exposure of mercury because it causes methylmercury to develop, which causes them to decline in health and oftentimes causes deformities in offspring. This is a figure demonstrating hypothesized results of global warming on the Arctic drainage basin. So climatic warming could impact increasing summer river runoff and winter river runoff. More impacts, the ground becomes destabilized, threatening buildings and transportation, such as roads, and economic costs will increase for healthcare and infrastructure sectors. 3.2 million people live in areas of the Russian Arctic with permafrost. Costs for healthcare needs resulting from permafrost degradation are estimated to be 3% of the annual budget, and costs for infrastructure restoration are estimated to be 0.21% to 0.91% of annual gross regional product.
So, what actions are being taken to prevent the permafrost melting? And on the right, we have a figure showing the different regions in Russia and which ones are at most risk from the permafrost melting. So there have been changing views recently about permafrost melting, with Russia joining the ranks of Arctic countries who are developing their own climate change plans. They did this in 2019 when they ratified the Paris Agreement in September that year. And this goes along with Putin's changing stance on climate change signs from 20 years ago, when he said that an increase of 2 or 3 degrees wouldn't be so bad for a northern country like Russia, where they could spend less on fur coats and the grain harvest would go up. But it's been proven that Russia would be greatly impacted by permafrost melting, and he has pledged to reduce Russia's emissions by 30% by 2030. Russia has shown interest in exploring renewable energy alternatives, but there is an unclear roadmap for this implementation. But there have been plans to introduce stricter environmental regulations to incentivize companies to modernize their infrastructures. Speaking of infrastructure, Russia has been carefully heading towards implementing its climate change adaptation plans. One of those measures is to prevent infrastructure damage caused by permafrost degradation. However, there are economic stakes in doing so, and mitigation measures to address the negative impacts of permafrost degradation would cost Russia between 0.1 to 3% of its GDP under various scenarios. Some more of their plans include the development of sectoral plans to adapt to climate change in the Russian Arctic by 2022, but the plan overall leaves it to regional governments to adapt to the permafrost melting. And Russia's plans currently, there is no specific targets to place to mitigate the consequences of the warming Arctic and address the issues of permafrost degradation.
All right, so effects of permafrost melting in the future. There's a lot of economic states that happen when the permafrost melts. By 2050, scientists predict that 20% of commercial and industrial structures and 19% of critical infrastructure representing 84.4 billion US dollars and 54% of residential buildings with a total cost of 20.7 billion US dollars in Russia will be negatively impacted by permafrost degradation. This could cause Russia's gross domestic product to decrease by 3%. So this happens because they talked about earlier how a lot of the houses are built on top of permafrost, so this could impact a lot of the infrastructure and harm the economy. So climate impact, as we learned in class, permafrost is a massive carbon sink. When it melts, CO2 and methane is released into the atmosphere, causing a positive feedback loop and contributing to climate change. It's predicted that by 2050, 18 to 29% of Russia's surface permafrost will melt. Scientists predict that the Arctic will melt roughly 2 to 3 times faster than the global average. So it's not just impacting Russia, but it's impacting the globe. So I have two figures shown here. On the left, it's Russian regions that are at most risk from permafrost melting, which the darkest areas is the most and the lighter areas is the least at risk. And on the right, it shows the unfrozen ground by 2050, the unfrozen ground by 2100, and the frozen ground by 2100. So you can see that the surface area is greatly decreasing as the evolution of the permafrost goes on throughout the 21st century. So in summary, public health is currently being impacted by disease, contaminated water, and harmed infrastructure.
Russia is making plans to combat climate change through plans for infrastructure damage, converting to renewable energy, and etc. They are behind other countries in their actions to slow down the melting of permafrost.
In the future, Russia still plans to take better action against the melting of the permafrost to prevent more infrastructure damage and try to maintain a stable economy. If you want to learn more, we have a short bonus video at the end here, talking more about permafrost melting in Russia. Thank you.